Hi, I'm Jacob Heilbrunn, the editor of the National Interest, a bi-monthly foreign policy journal and a daily website. Our new issue has just come out on President Obama. And today, one of our contributors, Professor Kishore Mahbubani, is here to talk about Asia and whether China will become number one and the United States number two. Is it inevitable?
I'm afraid so. It's just simple demographics. If all that China has to do is to achieve per capita income that is only 25% that of the United States, and China's GNP will become larger. And if you look at the past 2,000 years of world history, from the year 1 to the year 1820, according to a British historian, for 1800 out of the last 2,000 years, the two largest economies were always those of China and India. So it's only in the last 200 years that Europe took off and North America took off. But if you view the past 200 years of world history against the backdrop of the past 2,000 years of world history, the past 200 years have been a major historical aberration. So all aberrations come to a natural end, and you go back to the historical norm, and therefore it's perfectly normal to have China as the number one economy in the world. And there's nothing you can do to stop it from happening.
And in a multipolar world, how will America respond? Is this a good thing or a bad thing for America?
I actually think that the United States is likely to behave more responsibly in a multipolar world, as it did during the Cold War. And actually, as I've said, the American dream will burn brighter when America becomes the number two power in the world, which is a paradox. But it's a paradox that I think is a real one that will happen in the world of tomorrow.
Let's talk about the balance of power inside Beijing itself. We have the nationalists who see China as having been oppressed by the West, beginning since the Opium Wars. And then do we have globalizers who also believe that China has more to gain by becoming part of the world community than it does by upsetting the current system? Which would you see as the dominant faction?
I would say that both groups are nationalists. Both groups want to see China succeed and become powerful. What they disagree about is their methods. And the one, when I was appointed by UNDP to be the lead international consultant for a project on China and global governance, I attended a meeting where representatives of 50 Chinese think tanks were present in the room. And you saw the whole range of voices. At one extreme, you had the traditional nationalist voice saying, hey, China used to be weak, now China is strong, now it's our time to assert ourselves and prove that we're number one in the world. But in the same room, also Chinese representatives, others saying, yes, China was weak. Yes, China is strong now. But why are we strong now? We are strong now because China integrated itself in the global order, opened up its economy, joined the forces of globalization. So today, China has got a greater stake in a stable rules-based order than any other country in the world. So China, it is now China's national interest to support a global rules-based order. They're both nationalists. But if one is saying, let's be more unilateral, and the other saying, no, let's be more multilateral.
We've talked a lot about China. What about the city-state that you hail from, Singapore? What's its future in this new Asian order?
Well, Singapore is very fortunate. It's celebrating its 50th anniversary of independence in 2015. And no other state in human history has improved the standard of living of its people as comprehensively and as quickly as Singapore has. This is a remarkable historical feat on the part of Singapore. But the point I make to my fellow Singaporeans is that the best is yet to be. That indeed, the next 50 years could be another golden era for Singapore, because with the Asian century happening in the 21st century, and as you know, when you have a new economic and cultural renaissance taking place, as you will see in Asia, the world will need a capital for this renaissance. And so London was the capital for the European era. New York was the capital for the American century. I think Singapore can become the capital for the Asian century.
We're publishing an article in the next issue of the National Interest by an Australian academic, John Lee, who argues that everything you've just said is completely false for a very basic reason. There will be no Asian century because of technological advances. That robotics and 3D printing and other advances mean that American corporations and European corporations, well, they're all global now, but will have much less of an incentive to draw on labor in China or Vietnam. That the utility of cheap labor will diminish drastically, and then you'll just have robots producing these goods 24 hours a day inside the United States, which that will level the playing field. What's your response?
Well, I mean, anything is possible. He may be right, but he represents a form of Western wishful thinking that has been around for a long time, that denies that the world is going to change fundamentally. I wrote an article in the National Interest over 20 years ago called "The West and the Rest." And my friends say to me that every prediction that I've made in the last 20 years so far has come true. And it's perfectly natural for the Asian century to happen precisely because it was so unnatural for the Asians to underperform as much as they have over the last 200 years. And if you want a glimpse of the future, I always say, go to any leading American university. Go to the graduation ceremony. And when the list of PhDs in science and technology are read out, you'll be astonished at the number of Asian names walking up the stage to receive their PhDs in science and engineering. So the great scientific future that John speaks about could equally well happen in Asia as it could in America. So I would say that if you're a realistic person and if you believe that you want to prepare for the most likely scenarios, prepare for the Asian century.
How much influence do you think China is exercising inside North Korea right now?
I think China is doing the world a huge favor by keeping North Korea in a very tight box. Because it's very clear that the capacity for North Korea to create mischief is very strong. And from time to time they have done so. But I think President Xi Jinping has demonstrated that he's a very strong and tough leader. And you notice that he's taking a much tougher attitude towards North Korea than his predecessors did. And in that sense, I think the world should send China a thank you note for keeping North Korea under control.
Do you see the United States, if it becomes power number 2, you prognosticated a rosy scenario under which it becomes domesticated or accustomed to its new status. But couldn't you see another one where nationalists, forces inside the United States, would argue that the United States has been too passive and too soft? That's the argument that we hear in a strong wing inside the Republican Party today, that in fact Obama has bungled by being an appeaser that he's been much too soft in dealing with foreign authoritarian regimes. That the United States needs to remilitarize and actually to act much more boldly. Wouldn't that also be a probable scenario?
I mean, certainly, it's happened throughout history that declining powers do behave irrationally, and I hope very much that the United States will not behave like that. That's why I think the best way to prevent the United States from behaving irrationally when it becomes number two is to prepare for it as early as possible. But as I document in my book, The Great Convergence, when I chaired a discussion in Davos on the future of American power, I was just shocked to learn that no American politician can have any words coming out of his or her mouth saying when America becomes number two, if America becomes number two. And I think that's very dangerous, because if you cannot speak about and discuss what's inevitable, then it's very dangerous. You may suddenly wake up and react very irrationally when that happens. So it's better to talk about it as early as possible and to say, now what can we do about it? And I actually think, just as when you look back in history, some of America's best years were in the Cold War, because America had to behave very shrewdly and very carefully in containing Soviet power. And it did a brilliant job of winning far more friends in the world than the Soviet Union ever did. And that was a result of having very wise and shrewd leaders. I think when you entered the unipolar world, the mistake that America made was to become very unilateral. And sadly, it was my Republican friends who decided to go to war in Iraq. And the war in Iraq was clearly a geopolitical gift by America to China. Because the Chinese said, we have 10 free years while America gets lost in Iraq. So it's better for the Republicans to go back to the Richard Nixon, Henry Kissinger tradition of being very careful, shrewd, and wise in American diplomacy, because that's the way forward.
We'll find out in 2 years. Right now we have President Obama. As a final question, how has he done at winning friends abroad?
Well, I think there is a certain degree of disappointment with President Obama, because on the one hand, he gave brilliant speeches. I mean, to give you one example, the two speeches that he gave in Cairo and Istanbul were the two best speeches that any American leader had ever given on America and the Islamic world. And so he raised the hopes of these 1.4, 1.5 billion Muslims in the world that America's policies towards the Islamic world would change. But nothing changed. And that's a pity, because frankly, President Barack Obama could have done a lot more in his term as president. And I, for one, was very happy when he was elected, but I'm very sad that he hasn't had the kind of positive results that he could have had.
Thank you for these probing and provocative remarks.
Yeah. Thank you.